When I was 17, I lived in a quiet town surrounded by miles of thick woods. Everyone called it Blackwood Forest, and it had a reputation for being unnerving. Kids spread rumors about witches, cults, and missing hikers, but most of us didn't believe them. To me, it was just the woods, dark, endless, and strangely inviting. One summer evening, I was walking back home from a friend's house. The path cut through part of the forest, something I had done countless times before. But that night was different. The air was heavy, and every sound seemed louder, sharper. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the creak of branches swaying overhead. Halfway through the trail, I stopped. I thought I heard something. At first, it was faint, almost like a distant echo. Then it grew clearer. Screaming. It wasn't playful, not like kids shouting, not like someone joking around. These were blood-curdling screams. Desperate, terrified. The kind of screams that made my stomach clench and my blood run cold. I froze, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The screams were coming from deeper inside the forest, far off the path. For a few seconds, I just stood there, listening. They rose and fell, like someone was being tortured. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, to run, to get home as fast as possible. But another part of me, that reckless part that comes with being 17, made me step forward. I told myself it had to be someone in trouble. What if it was a woman being attacked? What if it was a kid? I couldn't just ignore it. The deeper I went, the harder it was to breathe. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the air thicker, colder. My flashlight beam shook with every step. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the screams stopped. The silence was worse. I stood in the pitch-black forest, flashlight trembling, ears straining for any sound. My pulse thundered in my ears. That's when I noticed it. A strange clicking sound, steady and deliberate. Not natural, not an animal. It echoed from somewhere ahead, almost mechanical, like two stones being tapped together. Then came the smell. It hit me like a punch. A foul stench of rot, copper, and damp earth. My stomach lurched, and my body screamed at me to leave. I turned, intending to run back to the path, but then I saw it, a figure standing between the trees. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but my light caught it for a split second. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Its skin looked gray, stretched too tightly across its frame. And in that moment, I heard the screams again. But this time, they weren't distant. They were all around me. Every direction I turned, the forest echoed with shrieks of agony. Men, women, children, all screaming at once, overlapping, drowning out my thoughts. My chest heaved as panic surged through me. The figure didn't move, but the screams grew louder, circling me like a storm. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, crashing into brush, my flashlight beam flailing wildly. The figure was gone, but the screaming followed me, chasing me, pushing me to run faster than I ever had in my life. Branches clawed at my arms, ripped at my clothes, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I sprinted until I burst out of the tree-line, collapsing onto the dirt road that led back to my neighborhood. And just like that, silence. The forest behind me was calm, still, as if nothing had happened. No screams, no smell, just the wind in the trees. I staggered home, shaking so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. I didn't tell my parents what I'd heard. Who would believe me? 17-year-old me couldn't explain it. Hell, 30-year-old me still can't. For weeks afterward, I avoided the forest. But eventually, curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know if what I experienced was real or just some hallucination brought on by nerves. So one afternoon, when the sun was high, I went back to the same spot. Nothing. No smell. No figure. No screams. But then, as I turned to leave, I noticed something scratched into the bark of a nearby tree. Deep grooves like claw marks, and beneath them, words etched crudely into the wood. We still scream. I haven't set foot in Blackwood Forest since. But some nights, when I lie awake in bed, I swear I can hear those same screams again, faint and distant, as though the forest is calling me back. And I know if I ever answer that call, I won't come back out. When I was 14, my family was living in a small town called Hollow Creek. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, just another stop because of my father's work assignment. We all knew we would be moving back to the city at the end of summer, but in that short time I had made a friend at school. His name was Daniel. Daniel had a way of pretending he was tougher than he really was. He always carried himself with swagger, but when you knew him long enough, you saw the cracks. Still, he was fun to be around, and since I was moving away soon, his parents didn't mind when I stayed over at his house one weekend. That next morning, Daniel told me he had found something deep in the woods a couple of miles from his place. "It's a cave," he said with a grin. "We should check it out." To my 14-year-old brain, it sounded like an adventure. I didn't even hesitate. I didn't think about danger or risk. I just wanted the thrill. Daniel admitted later that he had never actually gone inside the cave. He had just stumbled upon it while wandering in the woods. That should have been the first red flag. It took us a while to find it, following half-hidden paths until we reached a thick patch of brush. Behind it, an opening gaped in the hillside, jagged and black like a mouth waiting to swallow us. From the outside, it didn't look like much. But once we stepped inside, the truth was obvious. Someone had been there before. There were old beer bottles scattered across the ground, crumpled chip bags, bits of broken glass. It looked like a hangout spot for local kids. That's all I thought it was at first, nothing more than a teenage hideout. But the deeper we went, the worse it became. The air grew heavier, sour with a stench that clung to the back of my throat. Trash was piled against the rock walls, but not in a careless way. It looked lived in. A dirty blanket was spread across the dirt floor like a bed. Against the corner, an old grocery bag reeked as though it had been used as a bathroom. And then there were the syringes. At the time, I didn't recognize what they were. Looking back now, I know exactly what I had seen. My stomach sank. This wasn't a hangout spot. Someone lived here. That thought alone was enough to make me uneasy. But what I found next made my skin crawl in a way I'll never forget. On top of a pile of trash sat an old, weathered photo album. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, shining my flashlight across its cracked cover, and opened it. The first images were black and white photographs, grainy and faded. At first, they seemed harmless enough. Fences, prison yards, tall watchtowers. But then I turned the page. My blood froze. The next images were of bodies. Piles of them. Emaciated figures in striped uniforms. Their faces were sunken, their eyes empty. I realized with horror that I was staring at photographs from the Holocaust. My hand trembled as I turned another page, and that's when I noticed two of the photographs were stuck together. Something smeared across them, dried and discolored, held the pages tight. It only took me a moment to realize what it was, and when I did, my whole body locked up. Someone had been using these photographs for something vile. I staggered back, while rising in my throat, flashlight shaking in my grip. The cave suddenly felt suffocating, as though the walls were pressing in, the air too heavy to breathe. I turned to Daniel, panic written across my face. "We need to leave. Now." For once, Daniel didn't argue. His own face was pale, his usual bravado gone. He told me he had found another album further back. Inside were photographs of women, bound, gagged, terrified. Tucked between them was a single photo of a child, her face disfigured by burns, her eyes staring lifelessly into the lens. And then Daniel whispered something that made my blood turn to ice. He swore he had heard coughing. It came from deeper inside the cave. A low, ragged sound, like someone hiding just beyond the beam of our flashlights. We didn't wait to confirm it. We bolted, scrambling out of that cave as fast as our legs would carry us, crashing through the underbrush, our lungs burning. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of his yard, collapsing in breathless silence, our faces drained of all color. That afternoon, still trembling, we finally told his parents everything. They called the police. Officers went out to investigate the cave. But when they searched, they found nothing. No albums, no blankets, no syringes, not even the smell, just trash. Daniel and I knew what we had seen. We knew what we had heard. But the cave gave up no secrets to the police. To this day, I can still recall the rancid stench in the air, the awful photographs, the feeling that someone was standing just beyond our reach, listening to us, watching us. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if whoever lived in that cave, whoever collected those photographs, knew we were there, flipping through their secrets. I wonder if they followed us out. My mother once told me a story from her teenage years that has haunted me ever since. She grew up in Ashwood, Virginia, in the early 1970s, and her family didn't have much back then. She was the oldest of 5 children, with 3 younger sisters and a baby brother still small enough to be carried. My grandfather was a strict man, hardened by life, but he always tried to prepare his children for the world. He didn't trust the neighborhoods they lived in, nor the people who came and went in those years. One late autumn weekend, he decided to take the family deep into the woods just outside Black Hollow, a town not far from Ashwood. His plan was to teach them how to handle a rifle, nothing more than a simple lesson in self-defense. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. The trees were stripped bare, skeletal fingers reaching toward the gray sky, and the ground was littered with brittle leaves that crunched underfoot. They chose a clearing just off an old dirt road that seemed to wind endlessly into nowhere. To the children, it felt like an adventure, a welcome break from school and chores. My grandmother came along as well, though mostly to keep an eye on everyone. At first, it was fun, laughter, curiosity, the sound of my grandfather's steady voice as he explained how to hold the rifle. But then, something shifted. It began faintly, the sound of an engine echoing through the woods. Cars didn't belong that deep in the forest, and the unnatural sound carried in a way that made the air feel heavier. My grandfather froze immediately, his shoulders stiff, his hand gripping the rifle tighter. He motioned for everyone to stay low. A moment later, a large blue Ford Galaxy rolled slowly into view, the engine far too loud for the oppressive silence of the forest. What happened next is the part my mother says she will never forget. The driver, a man she described as tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an unsettling calmness about him, stepped out. Without hesitation, he yanked open the passenger door and dragged a woman out of the car. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't even speak. She hung limply, like dead weight, as he pulled her by the arm and dropped her carelessly onto the cold ground. Then, without looking back, he climbed into the car and drove away, as if abandoning a woman in the middle of the woods was the most ordinary thing in the world. My grandfather whispered for everyone to stay hidden. They lay low, covered by leaves, hearts pounding so hard they were sure the woman could hear. And then, unbelievably, the woman sat up. Her head turned slowly, and her eyes locked directly onto their hiding spot. My mother swore it wasn't just a glance. It was deliberate. Her pale face, framed by tangled dark hair, looked straight at them with an intensity that made the blood drain from their bodies. It was as if she had known they were there the whole time. My grandfather, steady though shaken, asked her if she needed help. The woman shook her head. Her voice was low, almost hollow when she finally spoke. "I'll be fine." That was it. No request for help. No attempt to move. No fear. It was almost as if she wanted them to leave. My grandfather didn't argue. He quietly told the family to gather their things. The lesson was over. They began walking back toward the dirt road where their car was parked. But the nightmare wasn't finished. As they neared the road, the sound of an engine returned. The blue Ford Galaxy came crawling toward them, its headlights dim in the fading light. My mother's heart nearly stopped when she looked inside. On the front seat, plainly visible, was a machete. Large, sharp, placed deliberately where anyone could see it. The driver slowed his car beside them and rolled down the window. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that made your stomach twist. "What are you folks doing way out here?" he asked calmly. My grandfather lifted the rifle into clear view, speaking evenly. Just some target practice. The man's eyes lingered for a moment. Then he nodded. Good to know. He told them to have a nice day, then slowly drove off. The encounter ended as calmly as it had begun, but the tension, the sight of that machete, stayed burned into their minds. The next day, my grandfather couldn't stop thinking about it. Against my grandmother's protests, he went back to the woods alone. The woman was gone, but scattered in the leaves he found a few things. A wig, purse, pair of broken eyeglasses, and tissues stained with something he never spoke about. He brought them home, and when my mother saw them, she screamed. She became hysterical, insisting the woman had been killed, that they had witnessed the beginning of something terrible. My grandfather eventually took the items to the police. They promised to look into it, but nothing ever came of it. No follow-up, no news reports, no missing person case. It was as if it had never happened. They tried to put it behind them, but fear has a way of lingering. The very next morning, my grandmother called home from work. Her voice trembled as she told the children not to take the bus to school. When my mother asked why, her answer made her blood run cold. "The blue Ford Galaxy," she whispered, "is sitting at the bus stop, waiting."